Hey, it's me, Peppermint, and I don't usually do videos like this, but I wanted to take a minute and talk directly to you. After having a momentous week and a wild week, I went down to Washington, D.C. to hear a really historic Supreme Court case being argued on behalf of transgender rights. There was a rally, there were people speaking. Of course, there was a court case happening inside the Supreme Court. And then I had the opportunity to do an interview with CNN. And I just wanted to tell you all about that. Now, first of all, let me set up the context a little bit. And this is going to be a long video because one of the things that we've seen over the past year is that in light of the recent election, transgender people have been thrown under the bus. People are basically blaming transgender people for the loss of the election. And they're saying that the Democrats are too woke and that we have gone down the wrong path. And there's a lot of people that were saying during the campaign that transgender people are groomers and that they're attacking their children and that they're chopping off babies' genitalia. And we're stealing all of the money that you're making so that we can get our surgeries, things like that. Ultimately, that is all a lie and a distortion. It's absolutely categorically untrue. Trans people are a very small portion of the population. I want to address some of those things, and I also want to take a moment to tell you a little bit about what happened that day in Washington, D.C., tell you what the court case was all about, and then tell you about what happened in the CNN interview so that you can understand the conversation. It was a panel that took place. There were people from both sides who were saying all types of things. There were some things that were said in that interview that I wasn't able to address. Make sure you click and subscribe, share, leave a comment. First, I'm going to start with the opposition. A lot of people have probably heard a lot about transgender people over the past couple of years. What I would say, most of the conversation that you hear about trans people in the past 5 years really is coming from people who have a problem with the visibility of trans people, have a problem with the fact that transgender people are appearing in film and television, that transgender people are being included in various places like the workplace, that transgender people are basically being considered. There are people who have a problem with that. It seems as though that is one of the things that they mean when they say that they are sick and tired of woke. It's as if they believe that transgender people are brand new. And I do think that there's some people who think that because a transgender person was on a favorite TV show that trans people are brand new. There also seem to have an issue with people are coming out at a younger and younger age. I think before you would just come out of the closet because you were sick and tired. You couldn't take it anymore. And if you stayed in the closet, at least I can think of for myself, I stayed in the closet until I could not take it anymore. For a lot of people, that's when you're an adult. That's when you're much older. However, because the world is changing, becoming more progressive, people are becoming more knowledgeable about different types of people, and there is inclusion and diversity that's happening. Trans people are able to have more visibility, which means it allows people to not feel so alone. Seeing other people, other queer people, certainly other trans people over the years has allowed me to build community, see that there's people that are like me and wanting to connect with those people. And I think that's a very human thing to want to do. Nobody wants to be isolated and alone. Right now, they're starting to attack pretty much every single area that transgender people exist in public. And they're doing it while saying we're not doing that, which is so strange. There's a challenge in the Supreme Court because Tennessee has outlawed gender-affirming care for minors, for people under the age of 18. And that has also happened in 23 other states, or 24, nearly half of the states in the United States have placed a ban on gender-affirming care. In addition to that, there are obviously people speaking out, passing measures, policies, and proposing laws that make it illegal for transgender people to use the bathroom in public. When you make it impossible for someone to receive health care or use the bathroom in public, those are the two ways that you can relegate that group of people, that type of person, and make it very difficult for them to live a life in public. That means that they can't work in public, limit access to their ability to earn money, their ability to hold a job, their ability to socialize in public. It takes all those things away. Not having access to gender-affirming care means that you'll feel a certain way, but you might look completely different. And gender-affirming care provides a really good service in allowing not only an individual, but the people around them to feel more comfortable with that person's gender expression. Everyone has a gender expression. If you're a man, acting more masculine. If you're a woman, you know how to act more feminine. That is a gender expression. These are behaviors that you learned. Sex is what you were assigned at birth. When people look at your genitalia and say, oh, that's what it is. One of the things that used to be true socially is that they would look at, per se, a little boy and assume he's a boy and he's going to like girls. And this is a girl. She's going to like boys. And that's the way society works. There are people who live outside of that, whether it's sexuality or gender. That's a whole nother video. I thought it was important to provide a little bit of context in that regard. The opponents of transgender people and transgender healthcare are doing things like challenging access to bathrooms, challenging access to healthcare. They started with minors. And it's important to point out that gender-affirming care for youth is not chopping off babies' genitalia. It's not. In fact, most people who get surgery don't even get surgery until after they've had a puberty. If there's surgery on genitalia, the goal is to have a functioning genitalia that works, genitalia that is a successful surgery that allows the person to feel good in their gender, genitalia that looks and functions the way that it might typically look and function on another body. From what I know, surgeons say that the best time to do that is actually not on a baby, but on someone who has undergone puberty or an adolescent or a young adult, an older teenager. So what is gender-affirming care? Gender-affirming care is basically any type of care that anybody undergoes for themselves or that they partake in that allows them to feel better in their own body, more aligned with their own gender. So if you are a man and you know that you are manly, doing things to feel more manly and more masculine, like going to the gym, taking testosterone, lifting weights, dressing in masculine or manly clothing. This is basically gender-affirming care. Gender-affirming care doesn't mean you're going to have surgery. For trans people, it's the same thing. However, you are utilizing the same tools that would allow you to experience the care for the gender that you would like to be in. If you're a trans woman, someone who is assigned male at birth, but feels feminine, you may not want to do things that are perceived as masculine. You might not want to lift weights and have testosterone surging through your body because those things will have an impact on your body that could build your muscle, make you look more masculine, things like that. A lot of that happens at puberty. Ultimately, for me, gender-affirming care was me trying to slow down or reverse the impact that the first puberty that I had, what people might call a male puberty, me trying to erase those effects. And there's certain things that I can't change. I can't change the timbre of my voice. I can't change my height. You can't change your shoe size. These are things that all were impacted, secondary sex characteristics that were impacted by puberty. What's interesting, though, is once I took testosterone blockers, a lot of those things started to reverse. And so the testosterone blockers really worked well for me. Then obviously taking hormones and then looking into surgeries allowed me to basically not only reverse what would have been the impact of that first puberty on my body, but also allow me to feel more comfortable in my own skin and allow other people to feel more comfortable with me when I enter their spaces. So I think that's what we're thinking about when we're talking about gender-affirming care. It's important to note that gender-affirming care does not just apply to transgender people. When we're specifically talking about cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, testosterone blockers, things like that, the largest consumers of gender-affirming care are cisgender people who are not trans. That's really important to state. Things like hormones for hormone replacement therapy, puberty delayers, puberty blockers, things that pause or block the impact of puberty on you are readily available. If you've got precocious puberty and you are not transgender, there are medicines. If you are a young girl who is starting to grow breasts and get their period when they're like 8 years old, which is people would say generally early, there are medications that your doctor can prescribe to you that can put a pause on those things. It doesn't stop you from having it, but it puts a pause on that until later. If you are a young boy who's going through puberty and you maybe have gynecomastia, which is growth of breast tissue, that for some young boys can look like breasts that might be on someone who's female. There are things, treatments, and things that can be done. These people aren't transgender, and they are utilizing gender-affirming care. Women receiving breast augmentation surgery, men receiving testosterone because they've got low T. These are all gender-affirming care. Women who are undergoing menopause can receive hormone replacement therapy to ease the impact of their menopause. That's gender-affirming care. It's really important to note that if you are not transgender and you're having an issue with your puberty, if you're having an issue with the way your body is feeling, the hormones, there's too many or too little in your body, you can get those things right away. So what we're asking for is that transgender people have access to those things too. So the challenge in the Supreme Court that was heard was a challenge to Tennessee SB1, was a law that stated that minors, people under the age of 18 who were transgender and were experiencing gender dysphoria should not have access and will not have access to these gender-affirming care therapies, medications, and treatments that cisgender people already and abundantly have access to.
I note that your brief does not talk a lot about this, but one of the articulated purposes of this law is essentially to encourage gender conformity and to discourage anything other than gender conformity. And I'm wondering how you think that plays into the analysis.
I disagree with that characterization of our law.
Encourage minors to appreciate their sex and ban treatments that might encourage minors to become disdainful of their sex. Sounds to me like we want boys to be boys and we want girls to be girls. And that's an important purpose behind the law.
The challengers to the law, the United States and Lambda Legal and ACLU, Chase Strangio being the lead attorney who's transgender, making history, we're saying that's sex discrimination. Because if you are assigned female at birth and you are 6, 7, or 8 years old, and let's say hypothetically that girl starts to get her period early, the doctor would prescribe her medications to delay and stop that from happening. Going through the wrong puberty, or a 6-year-old going through puberty, can probably cause a lot of distress because your body starts to change in ways that you don't feel very good about and that might stand out to other people. That's the same thing that transgender people experience. If you are a trans girl assigned male at birth, going through what people would call a male puberty can be very distressing, on top of the fact that many people target transgender people and queer people in school, in social settings. 2010, we saw an uptick in people who ended their own lives and harmed themselves due to bullying. The next iteration of that for trans folks was to give them access to certain types of gender-affirming care early. For youth and children, gender-affirming care means dressing in the clothing that makes you feel the most comfortable. You may be choosing a new name that makes you feel better about yourself. Asking other people to use your pronouns, treat you with respect in this sort of new expression. The challenge to this is that it's based on sex discrimination. If a young girl who has access to these puberty blockers, delaying her period because she's getting it too early, if that young girl is able to access those things, and every young girl is able to access those things, except if you are assigned female at birth and you also could get a period, but you don't want to receive a period because you identify as trans masculine, or a trans man, a trans boy, you don't want to get a period and you may not want your body to develop into womanhood, then you want access to those same things. But blocking access to those things is based on sex discrimination.
the court says the argument is that if the Equal Protection Clause does not outlaw miscegenation statutes because of their reliance on racial classifications, the question of constitutionality would thus become whether there was any rational basis for a state to treat interracial marriages differently from other marriages. On this question, the state argues the scientific evidence is substantially in doubt, and consequently, the court should defer to the wisdom of the state legislature in adopting its policy of discouraging interracial marriages. And so for me, this kind of idea that the way we look at it is not first, are you drawing these classifications, and then state, give us your evidence so we can make sure that there's a proper fit. If instead we're just sort of doing what the state is encouraging here in Loving, where you just sort of say, well, there are lots of good reasons for this policy, and who are we as the court to say otherwise? I'm worried that we're undermining the foundations of some of our bedrock equal protection cases.
I share your concerns, Justice Jackson. I think one of the things that's happening in this case is we're seeing a lot of concerns that come in at step 2 of the analysis being imported into that threshold question of whether a classification has been drawn in the first instance. Concerns about real differences between males and females. That is exactly what heightened scrutiny is intended to test in the application of heightened scrutiny. If Tennessee can have an end run around heightened scrutiny by asserting at the outset that biology justifies the sex-based differential in the law, that would undermine decades of this court's precedent.
So that's the challenge to the Tennessee law. And inside the courtroom, they were going through it, giving their arguments. I think that the defendants in this case, the people representing the state of Tennessee, they just didn't really seem to have that good of an argument. A lot of the things that they were saying were based in falsehoods. Regardless of how the attorneys on either side argued, the truth of the matter is it's a majority conservative court. They're probably going to rule against it because they already had their mind made up in the first place. That's how it goes. Outside the courtroom, there was so much joy. There was so much community and togetherness. There were so many wonderful people from all parts of the community who spoke, trans masculine people, trans femme folks. Most of the people were speaking about the joy that they have being trans, how happy they are, and how much more at ease they are since coming out as trans, since undergoing a medical transition, being able to take advantage of the very things that Tennessee and 23 other states, nearly half the states in our country, are taking away. There was also a sort of acknowledgement that it gets better, and regardless of what Tennessee does, or regardless of what restrictions people try to put on gender-affirming care, it doesn't change who we are fundamentally at the core. It may make things harder. It may mean that we have to struggle a lot more. It may mean that we're targeted a lot easier because we stick out like a sore thumb, because we don't blend in, because we weren't able to take advantage of the gender-affirming care. But it doesn't mean that we won't be happy, especially now that we have looked up in the light and seen that we're visible. And now I know who to talk to, and now I know who to ask questions to, and who to get together with, and commiserate with, to connect with, to celebrate with. Those things can't be taken away. And that's a really important thing to say. I hosted the rally. I got a chance to speak, and we got a chance to see Chase Strangio and the rest of the team from ACLU and Lambda walk out of that courtroom, and they were just beaming. You could tell that they did some great work for our community. Stopping people from being able to make their own medical decisions and blocking access to health care impacts us all, even the people with ill-informed decisions. More often than not, we are seeing these types of conversations happen. And oftentimes these decisions are made about us without even including our voices. But we are here today to use our voices loud and clear to say that people, no matter their gender identity, their background, deserve fundamental rights. So as I was on my way back from Washington, D.C., I was invited to go on to CNN. And originally I had heard that they had considered an all cisgender panel to talk about trans issues. And I certainly think this is a good opportunity to include trans people in that conversation. They obviously considered having a trans person, moi, on there. I think that was a good idea. But I didn't want to go on it alone. So after some back and forth, they invited myself and Shane Diamond on to talk on the panel. I'm really grateful to Abby Phillips and the rest of the CNN team for inviting me and Shane Diamond on, and all the other guests that they had who stayed there the whole time. I felt included for the first time in a while. The whole entire conversation went so fast, it was really difficult to remember what everybody said and answer slow and methodically. This is the thing, when you are an opponent of something, it's really easy to say 25 statements, most of which are not true. Oh, they're killing the kids and they're running them off the cart and they're going to this place and they're doing the surgeries on these people, and your child can go to school and come home after having a sex change. When you're trying to defend yourself, your humanity against those things, you have to take it slow. You have to speak in a really clear way for people who don't understand and are learning. So you can't go off the handle the way that with naming 25 other things and saying, attacking, they're trying to, you just have to say gender-affirming care is for everyone. Anyway, so I figured I would sit and watch and react a little bit to the CNN interview and basically answer some of the things that I wanted to say that I didn't get to say. So here we go.
It seems to me that it is something where we are extraordinarily bereft of expertise.
The opponents of gender-affirming care for minors say that it's experimental and that we should stop it so that the children who are undergoing gender-affirming care wait until they're 18, until they know for sure. This way they can make up their own mind about it. But by the same token, they're also saying that it's experimental and it's brand new and that it could be harmful. And until we know 100% beyond the shadow of a doubt that there's no risk at all, then transgender people should not be able to take this. But what they're not saying and they're not realizing is that cisgender people are already taking these medications. And no one is going in to that young girl who's got her period at 8 years old and saying, no, you shouldn't take that drug that's going to delay your period until a more suitable age. You shouldn't take that because we don't know what the impact is going to be in your body. No one's saying that. Why aren't there any challenges in any state to that use? It's almost as if cisgender people who aren't trans take aspirin for their headaches every day. And then we also find out that aspirin contains salicylic acid. Salicylic acid is used in skincare and beauty products. And so you can take aspirin and crush it up and put it on a pimple. It'll get rid of it like zit cream. Let's say transgender people want to use aspirin for zit cream because it has salicylic acid in it. Suddenly, Tennessee is like, no, trans people should not be able to use this. I just think that's not fair. Because the truth is, every single medication that we have has side effects and risks. They all do. Moving on.
If you prevail here on the standard of review, what would that mean for women's and girls' sports in particular? Would transgender athletes have a constitutional right, as you see it, to play in women's and girls' sports?
I think one thing that's really telling here is that he said transgender athletes. He didn't say transgender women or trans femme athletes in girls' sports. If everything goes the way that they want, like the Nancy Mace bathroom policy, then trans men will end up in the women's room. And then they would end up playing on girls' sports. And if you've ever watched the movie Changing the Game, available on Hulu, about transgender people in sports, there was in Texas a wonderful wrestler, transgender wrestler, who wanted to wrestle on the boys' team but couldn't because he's a trans man and assigned female at birth, forced to wrestle on the girls' team. He is a manly-looking dude. And when he showed up to wrestle, the crowd was booing him because they thought that he was a trans woman. And they're like, see, this isn't fair. The trans people, this trans guy should not be, this transgender she should not be in women's sports. That's where you want him to be. You won't allow him to play in men's sports. You won't allow him to wrestle on the boys' team. But he wants to wrestle because he finds a lot of joy in it. So he's forced to wrestle on the girls' team. How does that make any sense? And so he's asking, does this beyond any shadow of a doubt allow people access to live happy and free lives in any other area? And I think that was really telling because ultimately we know the next thing that they're going to outlaw is if they can outlaw this, then they're going to outlaw access to sports. They're going to outlaw, which they've already begun to do. Then they're going to outlaw access to bathrooms, which they've already begun to do. And then they're going to outlaw access to jobs, which, moving along.
Peppermint, walk us through this. What is the case for gender-affirming care for minors specifically?
I think it really does revolve around access to health care between a doctor and their patient and the parents of the child. Being able to have access to the type of health care that is available for all types of people, whether they're trans or whether they are cis, which is non-trans. And this court case in specifically is asking the question, is it fair to discriminate against transgender people and limit access to care because they are trans? And that's basically what's at the crux of this court case. Okay, so I think how I would answer it this time around, I realized that she was asking what is the case, meaning what is the argument in favor of gender-affirming care for minors. And the argument for gender-affirming care for minors is, for me, really simple. It allows people, when they go through puberty, to go through the puberty that they wish to go through. It allows them to live in their body in a way that they're comfortable. It allows them to move through the world, through their school, through their social circles, in a way that feels more aligned with who they are on the inside. And gender affirming care, again, for youth is usually things like clothing, pronouns, name changes, things like that. When you get older, doctors will prescribe as needed hormone blockers or puberty blockers, which basically stave off the impact of what they would call the wrong or the incorrect puberty, and allow them time to figure it out. And for some people, they go to the next stage and they continue with their transition. And for some people, they don't. Easy. I do want to say also, a lot of people who are talking about transgender issues won't admit or probably don't know is that when you see a woman across the street, you say that's a woman because you see her, not because you've taken her blood and gone to the lab to examine her chromosomes and test her. Not because you've pulled down her pants and looked in her genitalia. That's when you see a woman, you grant her that's a woman just based on how she moves, how she sounds, how she walks, what she's dressed like. Those are all secondary sex characteristics. Those are the things that people primarily address. How you walk, how you move, how you interact with other people. That is the primary definition of gender-affirming care as it applies to children and youth. That's the main thing that I should have said, is that the argument is allowing kids to use different names, different clothing, different words in clothing and pronouns and things like that can provide them with comfort. And that's what I should have said. But instead, I basically talked about the court case because I thought that's what she meant.
It's a controversial procedure. We've seen in the past few years, places like Norway and the UK have reevaluated their guidelines on it. Which goes to show that the science is not settled on whether this is the best way to approach gender dysphoria in minors.
Okay, so one of the things I do want to say with regards to it's a controversial procedure. I don't know what he means. I think when he says that, it certainly sends the message that we're talking about genital surgery, and we're not. That's not in this court case, and that might be what he's talking about, but that's not what doctors are doing. And another thing I want to say is the doctors that are prescribing this type of care for transgender people are the same exact human beings, the same professionals, the same medical professionals that are prescribing the same hormone blockers, puberty blockers to that young 6-year-old, 7-year-old girl because she's getting an early period. That's the same doctors. So these are not quacks. These are not hacks. These are not people that are just crawling out from out of the gutter who are like illegally getting things. These are certified doctors who have access to knowledge that most of us don't have access to because they went to medical school. The people who are against it are individuals and politicians and a couple of mothers group and maybe some doctors who, oddly enough, don't treat trans people. They're doctors of, maybe they're dentists, or maybe they are doctors of philosophy or something like that, but they are not medical doctors that have transgender patients. I think one of the things that is really interesting is when he says the best way to treat kids with gender dysphoria is something that honestly anyone can. Gender dysphoria is a diagnosis, but gender dysphoria explains a discomfort with the sex assigned at birth and how it doesn't align with the gender that this person feels and that they feel not at ease. Listen, there's a lot of people who are not transgender who, don't feel or at times don't feel at ease in their body. There's women or girls, women, especially adolescent girls, who don't feel at ease with their womanhood or with their womanness or with their the fact that they're going through puberty. There's boys who feel those same things. And I'm not saying that those people are transgender. My point is that those people are also experiencing a little bit of what it's like to feel awkward and embarrassed in your body as your body grows and transforms and changes. So the best way to treat gender dysphoria for people who are experiencing it is anything that can make them feel better in their body and in their gender and in their sex. And those are using the same drugs and treatments and therapies that people who aren't trans use.
Again, if you look at countries like Norway, Sweden, Finland, UK, France, they've changed their guidelines just in the past 2 years because they've looked at that old evidence again and said that actually when you take out the bad studies and just look at the best studies, we're really not sure if this is on net better than psychotherapy for teens.
See, I wonder what he means by the bad studies. It'd be great to find out what Coleman means by the bad studies as opposed to the good studies, because he's saying that essentially he's saying the good studies are the ones that say that gender-affirming care is not good for minors. But as of the past couple of years, most of the reports that have come out that I've seen that are recommending not prescribing or treating trans youth are all derivative of the same source. It's not like there's multiple sources out there that are in opposition. In actuality, the people who actually in earnest examine and study this as a part of their job and actually look into it, not people that are just like curious and then form an opinion, people who treat people who are trans, people who prescribe these medications for both trans people and cis people, who have an opportunity to monitor their patients on these drugs and therapies, hormones, blockers, over time to see the impacts of these things, the effects of these things, the long-term effects of these things, which have been studied. Those people are saying it's fine. Those are the people that are prescribing the drugs. I don't know if he's being dishonest, or I don't know if he knows what he's talking about. But all the research that I've done shows that there are not a lot of studies that say trans medicine is harmful. There was something that a lot of people are going to hear about, the Cass report. And the Cass report ultimately was conducted in a way that didn't allow them to be scientific with their study. And the person who created the report came out with a statement later, like weeks after the report had been released, saying essentially that there were flaws in the way that this was done, and that I don't recommend that we stop treatment for trans youth. I think this is the main study that he's talking about when it comes to the UK. So I just think it's been disingenuous here. There's not enough information. He's oversimplifying and overgeneralizing and saying that everyone agrees that this is bad, and that's not true. Every single major medical organization in the United States, the ones that Americans depend on to get their treatments and their studies and their recommendations for all of the other healthcare that they receive, when it comes to trans issues, they are supportive of it. Keep going.
The question is when does that young child, when their brain is developing, when they're growing as a baby to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, when do we make the decision that it's their choice? In my mind and in my heart, you got to be 18 years old, because even if you ask mom and dad, now you're putting them in a position where down the road there's regret.
I think one of the things that we're talking about when we talk about transgender medicine and healthcare and whether or not it's safe or whether people should do it is really all about protecting the status quo. Feeling so bad about a young girl who's no longer able to have kids and she regrets it, and that could ruin her life. And I think that's fair. I think that's fine for people to have that concern. But I wish that the same concern would go in for people who are being teased and bullied at school because they don't fit in, because they are obviously moving around the world. They're too swishy as a boy. They're not masculine enough. And they're basically called a girl, or a young, really butch acting girl who's so masculine that she's called a boy. What about the regret of that person? The regret of having to go through the puberty that they didn't want to go through? If you know anyone who's trans, if you know anyone who's queer, if you know anyone who's gay, who lives in their skin, most people who are in the LGBTQ community, most people who live their life and come out after facing hardships and things like that, yes, there are people who regret saying that they were gay. Just because they have those regrets, it doesn't mean that we should make it so that no one can declare that they're gay. We should not outlaw medicine and the ability to medically transition because someone might regret it. There are people who detransition. And guess what? Those people, for whatever reason, decided that either they didn't want to have medical procedures, that they couldn't afford the medical procedures, or that they weren't trans. If you want to look into the people who are detransitioners, then you need to look at the entire group of people who are detransitioners. First of all, the very, very, very small amount of people who are detransitioners compared to the people who are very happy with the fact that they've transitioned. I think when we're talking about detransitioners, we're talking about the people who are proponents of highlighting these stories do it in a way that they basically are trying to say people who transition are unhappy. And that is not the case.
If these alternatives were imposed, that there would be no detransitioners. So they cannot eliminate the risk of detransitioners. So it becomes a pure exercise of weighing benefits versus risk. And the question of how many minors have to have their bodies irreparably harmed for unproven benefits is one that is best left.
I'm sorry, Counselor. Every medical treatment has a risk. Even taking aspirin. There is always going to be a percentage of the population under any medical treatment that's going to suffer a harm.
It's not fair to take that person's account and say we should outlaw gender-affirming care. I've not been forced to transition. I don't know of anywhere where you go into a room and I don't know anywhere where you go to a school at lunch, like Donald Trump said, and you're forced to have a medical procedure and have a sex change operation. I don't know that's happening. I don't believe that's happening. I think that is untrue. I think that's a lie, and it's told for a reason, to scare people into thinking that children are being forced to have surgeries at school. That is not true. So when we're talking about this, we're really talking about it from the perspective of, I think being trans is a mistake. I think it's not real. And I think that we need to do everything we can to protect just in case that person wants to have kids one day. And I think that's fair and fine. That's called informed consent. And my doctor informed me of it. I had to sign some information about it. And it's not just taking testosterone blockers. It's when you get surgery that I had to acknowledge that, right? So that's that. Okay, I'm talking a lot.
The reason none of those other uses are controversial is because those are long-standing, highly evidence-backed, non-politicized issues that have been conditions that have been treated that way going back a very long time.
Okay, so he's saying that these are non-controversial, highly evidence-backed. And if they're so highly evidence-backed, if using puberty blockers on a young cis girl so that she doesn't get her period too early is okay for her, then why can't a young trans person use those same blockers? If there's a young person who is assigned female at birth, a young girl, a young trans boy, both assigned female at birth, and they're both 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, let's say the young girl who's getting her period too early, let's say she's 11, but the young trans boy who was assigned female at birth, let's say he's 13, 14, however old he would be when he starts to go through puberty, they should both be able to pause their puberty until they feel better about what it is that they want to do. I just don't get it. Okay, so I just do want to say thank you to Abby Phillips and CNN for having myself and Shane Diamond on. I didn't expect that they would have two of us on there, and I do think that that moment stood out because it's not normal for them to have trans people on to talk about trans issues. And one of the things that Coleman said, that this is being politicized by the proponents or the advocates for trans health. That's not necessarily true. And people who are presenting this in an inaccurate way, saying things like, trans people are chopping off babies' genitalia and kids are going to school to have sex change operations at lunch. That's not people who are transgender. That's not proponents of gender-affirming care. Those are opponents of it. So all in all, I had a wonderful day in DC, being able to see the community gather and celebrate, support each other. And that was topped off by what I think was a great, stressful, but a good time on CNN, being able to have this conversation. I feel like it was just the start of the conversation. This conversation should be longer. That conversation could have been longer. And I hope that we'll get the opportunity to go back again. But I'd like to know what you all think. So please leave a comment, continue it. Please be respectful in the comments, because you will get your ass blocked. And if you're not following me, please follow me, subscribe, share, all that stuff. And I'll see you next time.